Thank you for the opening question. Well, for Indonesia, actually, with the understanding of the UNFCCC and the world in general, developing countries are still forgiven for trying to beat their poverty alleviation programs with some measure of pollution. Of course, it depends on the country itself, which is allowed to do so. There is a peaking period in the UNFCCC, whether they do so also. In terms of Indonesia, like I've explained, we have submitted an emission cut of rather ambitious, voluntary emission cut of, and that is being executed. Also, I've also explained that actually the problem with Indonesia in terms of emission is not the man-made emission, it is the natural occurrence of forests. So what we have to do is to distribute the funds, the development funds to the general public. And the second hand is to curtail the industry and the forests for not expanding at the expense of the, so there are two-pronged approach in that, and I think it is working. So I hope we can produce what we pledge to the UNFCCC, to the world, that we can close down or decrease our emissions. There won't be any job losses in it.
Okay, well, it comes nicely onto my second point. I mean, what kind of economic cost and what kind of economic benefit do you see overall with this transition to low carbon, or this emphasis on low carbon?
Actually, what is being victimized is the traders who traditionally deal in the oil and gas sectors. They stick to their usual business as usual, which is damaging for the world, whilst the nation gives more benefit to those who develop the alternatives, energy alternatives, in which case is, like I should explain, we are trying to follow a certain path. Of course, it is a words away from the path, that we try to use the solar energy to electrify, not electrify, is it electrify? No, not electrocute, electrify. To electrify the country, which is very logical because we have so many thousands of islands inhabited, and we cannot make an electricity grid there because those islands are only maybe 50 kilometers in length. So the only way is to use solar energy. That is why, in a personal sense, I'm working with the New Queensland University to have a program to give electricity to those outlying islands. And of course, the big grid will come from our traditional ignored potential, which is the geothermal. We have so many volcanoes that spew out, actually, that is energy, but unharnessed. So we're harnessing it, and that will electrify the big islands like Java and Sumatra and the others. So there are job opportunities, especially for the younger people and those who are not traditional bound, to make use of the wrong trade items that they're involved in. Thank you.
That's good. I like the fact that when you said young people, you looked at me, and that's always good to hear. Professor Newman, I'm just wondering, for someone like Indonesia with still a very much developing economy, something you touched on in your presentation, how can they produce transition to low carbon without causing an economic crisis and without harming economic growth?
Well, I think it's happening so quickly that the data is now showing that economic growth will be dependent on us making those transitions. It's not going to harm the economy. It will only harm you if you try to hang on to the old economy. The stranded assets are going to be stranded and causing economic problems. So you need to leapfrog into the future. And countries like Indonesia can do that quicker because they're growing quicker. And the opportunity is there to leapfrog into solar and car-free cities in ways that will improve their economy. So I'm very positive about these changes. They're called disruptive innovations because they disrupt the old system. And they're all very smart as well as sustainable. And this is the era of smart young people who can, I look at you too, the opportunity is there to take those digital trends that are happening and apply them to these new technologies and create wonderful new jobs and at the same time be saving the planet.
Florian, you wanted to jump in.
Yeah, I think that this is very positive also to hear that from you, because usually when you do that sort of work, you very often get that kind of world savior attitude from other people. And so why do you do that? And so do you do that to save the world? But this perspective is actually really helpful to say, like, look, we are the change that needs to happen. Otherwise, we're stuck in the rigidity trap of fossil fuel energy use, right?
Mm. And I'm just wondering, when you look at globally led citizen movements, which is something that you build upon, how do we transfer that to somewhere like Indonesia? And so we discussed privately over breakfast, I think the idea of somewhere like India and Kerala, where they're able to talk to one person who can talk to 7 people, and those 7 people talk to another 7 people. How can Indonesia build on that?
Yeah, I think it's for us it will be really important to always find local stewards. We don't see ourselves as a sort of NGO that comes to any specific place and then brings the huge innovation or the solutions to a place. That's also why we say we need to build collective solutions, and they of course need to be adapted to local contexts. I think it will be a lot about building in more resilience, more social structures that are smaller scale again. But that's actually a beautiful future, because it means more communities that decide for themselves or amongst themselves. Also, the example that what Peter showed, when sort of a very small unit of urban unit can also generate their own electricity or energy. That's a sort of an interesting thing. Also, yeah. I think it's a very positive outlook, actually.
Well, it's very positive for a city like Jakarta, which is actually a city of kampongs, which are all joined together, and there are regional issues of mass transit and so on that are needed. But if you want to go to solar in Jakarta, the structure is there. We have to create it in our cities because we've lost that village component. It's already there. So you can actually create solar citizen utilities around the kampongs that already exist. So the governance is there. You just need the technology. And the new technology of solar with blockchain software to enable that to work is emerging. And you don't have to go through great big solar thermal systems or geothermal, I don't think, to distribute the power in long power lines. You can actually produce it exactly where it's needed. And this is why I think that it is very quickly going to happen that it is cheaper now to do it that way. It's by far the cheapest form of energy, and so you can distribute it quickly and convert a whole city like Jakarta.
Can I put in some words, just a few words? Maybe I'd like to comment on your effort. in terms of Indonesian society, and maybe with others also, we don't have to go too far in trying to persuade people in a traditional way, because Indonesia is still a traditional country. So we may not fight tradition, we will work with tradition. So the efforts of making a network like this, if you approach what we call the pesantrens, there are thousands and tens of thousands of pesantrens. They will be very intrigued and very attracted by the idea of in helping out, call it the world, by making just small innovations. It is just an idea. So the structure is there. It's just you have to work with them, not against them. Thank you.
I wanted to make a very brief remark. I think a very big part of the transition will also be led by that element of humanity that is not present on this stage, by women. We have, although I'm a guy speaking for the initiative, we have our main coordinator, Juliana, is a woman, and we have a lot of women who are very engaged. And also in my work with international NGOs, I see beautiful female leadership towards a new way of approaching how we use resources. So I think there is something there when to do things differently, where empowerment of women and post-carbon transition go hand in hand quite nicely, actually.
Yeah, I've got to say, my institute with 110 PhDs is 70% women, so they're taking over.
That's good to hear. I have some questions, and you know, I've received a couple of questions, and it felt like Christmas, and I had a whole bunch of Christmas cards delivered to me. So it's a lot of questions to get through, which I apologize I won't be able to get through all of them, but I will try and persist with short and sharp answers. Professor Newman, this one's directed at you. How do you persuade private investors, developers to be sure that walkable designs can guarantee a high return of investments? Is there any evidence?
In my experience, you don't have to persuade them much. You give them the opportunity, because all of the literature and all of the competitions are now favouring the design competition. They're favouring that walkable outcome. There are developers here who I have worked with in Australian cities that find it quite easy these days to say, this is the kind of thing we want, and they immediately respond to it because they know that is the best way to sell it. And this is why I'm saying it's a market now. We don't have to convince people much. It's just a matter of opening the opportunity up and giving that chance to do it. Don't get put off by the traditional way of thinking that you cannot do a development unless you've filled it with car parking and lots of opportunity for cars. That's not the case. You can actually do it better now as a more walkable place, and it will sell better.
I've got a question, again unnamed, but to Florian. How do you bring climate actors that are down to earth onto the stage? How do you find down to earth climate actors?
I don't quite understand, like what that would mean to be a down to earth climate activist.
Local activist.
As a local activist. Yeah, of course, it's a. I mean, it goes down to things. How does our diet look like? How do we? What sort of transportation do we take? Do we? Yeah, I think you can start with your day-to-day life very easily before getting stuck in the big questions. That's what I definitely I got this since I started to do this work. I'm very much more conscious with my diet, for example, for myself. I'm not so much more conscious with my travel behavior. This is something I'm working on it, but I'm using a voluntary carbon tax.
I saw this morning you eating a lot of fruit, so that's a good start. Very healthy. And just a question to all the panel. how do you address what is still perceived to be an issue, walking and cycling still being seen as primitive and therefore a sign of poverty?
Go to the world cities and see that it's now seen as very cool.
In Indonesia, I think it's picking up. Of course, there are physical handicaps. In terms of bicycling in Jakarta, you can get hit by an irresponsible driver. So it is not much biking in Jakarta, but in other cities like I mentioned in Bandung or Bogor and Malang, they do bike because it is considered, and it is the most efficient and economic way of moving around. So it comes naturally.
All right, I'd just like to say thank you very much indeed to our panel for their time today and for their fantastic presentations. And I know for Peter and for Florian, especially speaking about notes, it's always very challenging, but great work, and for you as well, Mr. Whittler as well, for giving up your time and a really great presentation. It'll be good to see how Indonesia develops over the next couple of years for sure. Could you please give a round of applause to our panel, please? And now it's time for a coffee break, so I will see you back here in around half an hour time. Thank you very much indeed.